Hey,
Um, Good morning.
good morning.
You got some coffee in you?
Yeah, I got a couple cups, but hey, it's always fun to be back. We took last week off, 4th of July, so hopefully everybody had a good 4th, but we're back at Facebook Live, so
Yeah,
continuing that conversation.
we are. No, it's good to be back. And I was off, you know, a week or two before that as well.
Yeah,
So
you were. Now, you had the European extravaganza.
we
Where did you
did.
go?
We did a little dabble in Italy because one does dabble in Italy when they can. And then we went to France, my wife and I. We did we had this plan about a year ago, and we want to just kind of drive through the France countryside. So, yeah, it was a nice adventure, getting to see more of the world. Um, one of the more fascinating things I've realized is when you are in a foreign country, how eager, if you hear somebody speaking English, how eager you are to have a conversation with them. And mostly, if I go to dinner here in Los Angeles, I don't turn to the people next to me and say hi or talk. But if you hear somebody, you begin these random little relationships start when you find
Oh
this
yeah,
common. It's so
yeah.
bizarre,
They're islands of safety.
isn't it
Because
weird?
past bonjour, you're toast, right? And so,
Totally, totally. You feel like somebody is in the same boat as you, and
yeah,
you need this moment of like, hey, we're trying, we're doing the best we can here.
yes, sir. That's hilarious, especially in France.
Yes, yes. So no, it was good, but it was fun tuning in and watching, you and Matt and then Pastor Jim as well. But yeah, it's good to be back on Facebook Live. We're trying a new thing, obviously, 10 a.m. A little bit earlier. We were kind of dancing around that lunchtime, post lunchtime, depending where you are, hour. And now we're kind of in that pre lunch, or for some of you, right in that sweet spot of lunch hour. So we're hoping this is a good time, but always open to feedback on what's the right sweet spot for Mark and I.
So, with that, yeah, give us some feedback if you want to. Most of our viewers are not live. And so, but it's always good to have a live group because then we can deal with kind of real time questions. But yeah, we're kind of poking around on different
Yeah.
ones. So, we thought we'd just give you barely announced, unannounced 10 a.m. and see what happens. But
Yeah. Well, and the beauty, what we've loved about this as well is that it works great live and it's super helpful to get people, real time follow up, ask more questions, pushing in on things. But we love that it works later as well, that you can tune in
yep.
whenever and catch the conversation and connect with us afterwards as well. So it's kind of a
So,
fun
Alton,
meeting.
we got some exciting stuff happening on our PCC Facebook group, correct?
We do. We're launching two things, and love for you to jump into one or both starting next week, next Wednesday night, not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday night, 5 p.m. We're launching a Grow Group, Book of John. So if you want to jump in, it's online. We'll meet for 75, 90 minutes. Somewhere in there and be walking through John. So excited for that next Wednesday, 5 p.m. online. Send me an email if you have any questions, if you're interested, how to get involved. And then Tuesday,
Before you go to the and then, let me give a plug for grow groups.
give it to me.
If you want to grow in your faith, you got to take Sunday morning to the next level. Sunday
Yeah.
morning is one-way communication. You listen online, you hear the message, but the real application is talking about it with other people, encouraging other people, praying for one another. I was kind of an anti-small grouper early on in my faith. I just went to church and
Mhm.
that was it. But the real change took place when I actually got into a group, heard other people, how they're dealing with the passage, maybe even getting some nuggets that I was like, wow, I didn't hear that or didn't know that. So I just want to encourage you, if you've never been in a small group, grow group in particular, that mirrors off Sunday morning, which is what we do, you want to take that chance. Just log in a couple times. Hey, you know what? And if it doesn't work, you can log out. It's not a big deal. But I want to encourage everybody. If you're not in a grow group, that's one point. You come to church. That's great, but the next step is even greater. Be in a grow group.
No, and you're right. It is a risk, but it is where a lot of fruit is, and the online hopefully gives a safe view of it. You don't have to show up to somebody's home and walk in the door, and now you feel obligated. you can definitely log in and out. And kind of even our heart for this is kind of, you hear the Sunday sermons. Now Mark and I jump in on Tuesday and we try to push a little bit deeper, but ultimately the real back and forth conversation of our growth happens in those smaller rooms. And so super excited for that. I'm excited to launch my first official grow group. So I'm pumped to be part of one, leading one next week, next Wednesday. And then Tuesday, August 1st, we are launching a group on marriage. So Mark, do you want to share anything on that? Tuesday, August 1st in the evenings, marriage.
Yeah, it'll be a 7-week series, so it's got a
Yep.
beginning and an end. Um, and it'll be video driven. So what we'll do is we'll watch the video together, and then after that we have discussion. And there'll be different things we're doing, little breakout rooms and per couples and some nuances there. But ultimately, it's a 7-week session to help strengthen your marriage. I mean, we can all use that boost because it deals with communication, it deals with intimacy, it deals with arguing effectively. Just all the things that make a marriage stronger. And so I want to encourage you. Super convenient. It's online. So even if you're on vacation somewhere, you can still be part of the series. So that's the beauty of online. And so, yeah, we're looking forward to that. 7 weeks.
Yeah, that it's great. I'm excited to, again, my wife and I, to be part of that, to be joining that, to be walking in that with all of you. So whether you've been married for 2 weeks or 40 years, we all could use those moments of pause and reflection and trying to in a healthy way work towards.
Almond, how do they do that? How do they sign up?
Well, I think we'll make it easy. Just email me. Email amin@pccsc.org. amin@pccsc.org. It's in the chat. Send me an email, reach out, or you can reach out to me through the PCC online Facebook group, and we'll give you details and all that you need. And even if you just have questions, we'd love to hit those. But that said, I want to jump in. I want to bridge this, so you talk about marriage, and let's go straight to, Judas and betrayal. I think is that a good transition? No, I couldn't figure one
Good
out. And then,
segue.
uh,
It's interesting because Judas is somebody we don't really talk about a whole lot. And we all know the story, and it's completely tragic. At the end, betrays Jesus when he needs him the most, but yet kind of mysteriously part of a plan. And then he tragically kills himself at the end, and that's kind of where we go. We go, wow, okay, don't know what to do there. But this past week, we saw kind of Judas in action,
yeah.
and in action at a very interesting moment when Mary is anointing Jesus. It's his final week of ministry, effectively. It's at Passover, and we'll see even next week the palm branches are coming out, and Palm Sunday stuff. And yet we see Judas in action. And the approach kind of this past week was, wow, there can be some Judas factors that creep into all of our lives. We make him as the evil villain and write him off, but when we see what he's doing and how he's doing it, boy, it's something that can creep into our lives if we're not careful and aware of it, and super subtle. Because what's remarkable to me about Judas is he was good for 3 years. Maybe he wasn't in his heart. Can't judge that, but it wasn't until the end that he bailed out, and he was a trusted member of the disciples. He was the banker of the group. Think about it. The one you trust the most, you give the purse to. And he doles it out and does what he does. And so I'll just read a quick part of the passage so we can get some insight. But chapter 12 of John, verse 1, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there, and Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. And then Mary, here's the shift, she took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair, an act of worship. We didn't talk about this because Oscar talked about this a few weeks ago, so we just focused on Judas. The house was filled with fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, he who was about to betray him, said, why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor? Sounds godly, right? Verse 6 says, he said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief And having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. So we know that this guy was duplistic. He appeared godly, he appeared religious, he appeared devoted, he appeared selfless, give it to the poor. And yet it wasn't. He was duplistic. He had other agendas. And so we talked about duplicity in the Christian life and how it's easy to appear one way at church, different way at home, one way at work, a different way at church. There's all kinds of things that we can do as it relates to our duplicity, and we're good at presenting something that isn't true about ourselves. And we talked about one way to break that cycle is to be able to talk about our weaknesses, talk about our struggles, be willing to say, I'm sorry. That kind of breaks that Judas cycle. But finally, the last verse, Jesus said, leave her alone to Judas so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. So he's addressing the priorities. Mary's about me, Judas, and you, I know your agenda, you're about you. And so I'm leaving. Poor will always be here. Mary's got her priorities right. You don't. So we talked about even self-centeredness. Not only can our motives be askewed and we're duplistic, but our motives are usually self-centered. And to always ask ourselves why. Why do we do things? Why do we log on to Facebook Live? Is it to learn more and draw closer to the Lord, or is it to be able to impress our friends with answers? I mean, the why can be, it could be the exact same action, but it can be wrong because if our motives aren't right before the Lord, he's like, we could act like we're fully worshiping God. But if our heart is really trying to pick up on the guy or girl next to us, that ain't worship. That's duplistic, number one, and it's self-serving. So these are kind of the Judas factors that can creep in if we're not careful. And so it's really important that we pay attention to them. So
Yeah.
That's in a nutshell what we talked about.
That's great. And there's a couple things I want to press into and some of the feedback we got. The first is that I love how you start with this idea of Judas, because I think I'll speak for myself. Everyone loves a villain. Everyone loves the bad guy because it's easy then to root for the good guys and who's the bad guys. And Judas is a bad guy. And so that's great. And that makes it easy. And it's easy to write him off as a caricature, right? Like he's not a real person. He's this kind of boogeyman. He did this evil thing and he betrayed Jesus. And that's what we know about Judas. So that makes it really easy to put Judas in a box. The challenge and the problem is what you started pressing into and what you talk about a little bit about on Sunday, that Judas is more complicated than that. And if we allow ourselves to begin to recognize and understand that there's more to it, and it wasn't so black and white, and Judas walked with Jesus for years and was trusted, and yet he would still be able to do that. Well, that is confrontational to me, because now suddenly he isn't this boogeyman who's over there. And gosh, I can't believe Judas would do that. Now I'm forced to confront the humanity of Judas, that he was a real person, that are there parts of me that could also make those types of decisions. And is that it allows a possibility that I could turn my back on Jesus or betray the church in some dramatic way. And so I'll just let you push on that, but I love that kind of beginning focus on Judas was a real person and he walked with Jesus and he was trusted and he was one of the disciples. And that's who he was until we get to these moments.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. The boogeyman is never a good place to be, because we always know that we're not the boogeyman.
Yep.
And so, I mean, think about Judas for a second, just strategically. We know the end of the story. He didn't. So he's seeing a year's worth of wages be wasted. And he's trying to budget for the new year. And what the heck? You just wasted all the money. I mean, we could have given that to the poor. We could have shared it for hotels the next time and our Uber bills and whatever else we had at the time. What on earth just happened? And then he sees this whole thing going down, contract out on the life, Jesus not fighting back. What the heck? We're all going to die. And I want to be a law-abiding citizen because there's been an order out for his arrest. Now, I want to make a little money. I'm not an idiot. So I'm going to go to the leaders and tell them where he is, because this whole thing's blowing up and Jesus is allowing it and they're wasting money everywhere. It's smart for me to get out.
And can I even pause you and say this? And I gave up my life for you. I gave up my life to follow you and to walk. Like, I gave everything up for this person that seems to be walking down this pathway of destruction.
Right, right. And so, but to relegate to a boogeyman means that, I can't imagine. But if you really imagine, it could be very telling. We could all fall into that kind of thinking, explaining away, this makes sense. Why, even how they viewed the man, maybe how they viewed the Sanhedrin. These guys have done nothing but taxing us and ripping us off. I'm not going to give them Jesus' whereabout for free. It's time for them to pay me. So there's a lot of rationale that we can do in our duplicity. Now, we know the story, and we know ultimately he was convicted and he couldn't live with his decision, literally. But still, there's a potential there for all of us in terms of that kind of rationale, that kind of dismissing, that kind of logic. Yeah, for sure.
Especially when we find ourselves in seasons of frustration, disappointment, discouragement. I always know one of the red flag words for me that checks my heart is when that's not fair. Like, that doesn't seem right. Where I'm trying to be the bearer of like, well, this is correct and this is incorrect. And when I start feeling this sense of injustice in a normal environment, like, that to me is a check of like, where's your heart and motivation? And so again, we don't know all of Judas's motivations and everything behind it. But I think it's so important for us to take him out of this character and try to put some humanity back in who he was, because to me, it reveals, there's parts of my heart that would really resonate with some of that. And I'm frustrated, I'm discouraged, and I try to do the right thing. And some of my biggest areas where I've really struggled is when I feel like I'm doing the right thing, everyone else around me isn't, and yet why aren't I winning? Why is everyone else seem like they're winning except for me? Yeah. And that leads to a lot of discouragement and can put you in places where you can make poor decisions.
Yeah. In fact, we didn't take time to read in it. It's on the back of the worksheet for daily devotions, but Matthew 26 and Mark, I believe it's 14, were also the same story. And what's interesting is they don't call out Judas. It says the disciples said this. The disciples said this. So he wasn't floundering out here on his own. He actually even had support. John picked on, let's talk about Judas in particular. And who knows, maybe John had the most to grind there with Judas. Who knows, why he called him out that way. But this was a group too,
I don't want to take us too far down this rabbit trail, but definitely the question comes up of, okay, if Jesus was needed to die for our sin, isn't Judas just part of the story and the game? He had a role to play, and was he chosen? And did Judas have to betray Jesus for all this to happen? Like, is he, again, I know those are rabbit trails, but anything you can kind of give us just a little perspective on that? I know it's a much larger conversation, but just something to help tease that out a little bit for us.
Well, if you go too far down, then nobody's got a choice, right? So you're talking about ultimately predestination, which we know to some level is taught in the Bible. Ephesians 1 talks about, God picks us to become Christians, which is interesting because we go, if he picks us, then really we're just a pawn in the puzzle, a puppet to the puppeteer. But yet we're also called to present the gospel and make a choice. So by definition, those feel like not only tensions, but almost contradictions. So how do those work together? I don't know. But scripture presents them both, so they do work together. We're called to choose, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, pick up his cross, follow. That's a choice. But then God also calls people. So it's the same with Judas. It's no different. If Judas was called to betray Christ to effectively advance forward God's redemptive plan, but yet some way Judas had a choice in it, How those work together, I'm not exactly sure. And we could give example after example
Yeah.
of that tension of predestination versus choice. Not really resolvable, other than people will ask me, what do you believe? Do you believe in free choice or predestination? And I would say yes.
Yes.
Because it's if you go one side, Calvinistic, we got no choice. Arminians, the other side's all about choice. You
Mhm.
have problems with Scripture. So now we get into the dog theology that you've heard me mention many times. Just because we don't understand it doesn't mean it isn't true. My dog doesn't understand art, and so he doesn't appreciate art. He would step on art, chew art. He would not appreciate it. Doesn't mean it's not art. Doesn't mean it's not beautiful. It means he's a dog and not a human. And so, to some level, we're going to fall short in understanding the things of God because we're the creation, not the creator.
Mhm.
And I think predestination and choice, or in this case, Judas, picked in advance versus having a choice. Those are tensions that we won't be able to get, but they're there. Doesn't mean they're not true. It just means we don't get them.
And
But
that,
thanks for that bunny trail.
well, no, I mean, but yes, and again, I didn't want us to go too far, but I think it's worthy of articulating some of that. I think it's helpful to some of us. And again, if you want to push further, have more questions on that, please reach out to us. We'd love to sit in it. But I think that's a great kind of turn now from the rest of the conversation, which is goes back to this idea of Judas, and it goes back to this conversation we had about our motivations.
Mm,
And one of the things so interesting is, yes, Judas made a mistake. He sinned. Um, but so did all the other disciples as well. And they often made mistakes. And we see through scripture, the disciples' motives were all over the place at times. They were doing things because they wanted to be at the right hand of Jesus and who's going to be in your inner circle. And so the disciples' motives are all over the place. And we see that again and again, throughout the gospels of they weren't always sure. There's not one disciple that understood the call of Jesus fully, knew what that meant, understood the whole story, and walked through it perfectly. They fell, they stumbled, they struggled. Even after Jesus' death, they went back to their old lives for a season and were back to fishing and not. And so we see this again is that motivation is challenging because we're
mhm.
sinful. Motivation, you said in your message, only we know our motivation for doing things. So the first part of this question, that was a long way to get here, is this. Okay, you gave the example on Sunday. We're all sitting in this church today. And yet why we're sitting in here is all for different reasons and different motivations, right? I might be here because I believe in community and worship. I want to be part of that. I'm here because my spouse made me come. I'm here because my kids love it and I show up to do this. I'm here because of what I did this weekend and I feel like I need to come to church. I've been there, like I need to go to church today. We all have different motivations for coming. So question one, Mark, after 4 minutes of that is, okay, so what? We're all in church. Does the motivation matter if we all showed up to church that morning? Oh, yeah.
Yes, it matters.
Okay. I didn't know if you had frozen. So I didn't know if you were thinking or if you had
No, no,
frozen.
no, no, no. I was just trying to think of, okay, let me make this thing. Yeah, because when we go back to Jesus or the woman at the well, we hear that God desires those who worship him in truth and in spirit.
Yes.
We know that chilling statement, I believe it's in Matthew 7, where Jesus says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." But they
Mhm.
were talking about, didn't we do miracles in your name? Didn't we do, blah, 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 all this Christian stuff. And he's
Yeah.
going, didn't know. So I think when it comes to spiritual Jesus duplicity and motives, it's super important. That's why he lined up the Pharisees in Matthew 26. Woe to you, white-washed sepulchres, sons of hell, and all this stuff, because they were presenting spirituality, religiousness, godliness, and they weren't.
Yeah.
And so that's a big deal to God. I mean, it's all a big deal. If my motive for you is I'm trying to get you to say yes to a deal and all that, okay, I'm manipulating you. I could probably come before God and say, God, that wasn't honest. I don't want. But when I do that to God, that's
Mhm.
the next level, because not because God's injured or in some way can't handle it, but because it deceives other people spiritually.
Yeah.
and starts to blur the gospel because I'm getting in the way of it with false motives, right? We see pastors on TV and doing fundraisers and all kinds of miracles and send in your this and that and all. What's your motive? And
Yep.
now we're back to the money changers, and Jesus is flipping over tables. Right where? He's not
Yep.
doing it outside the fishing tables in the Galilean, desert. He's doing it in church, the temple. So, yeah, our motives are pretty important when it comes to God.
Yeah, and I think part of, and feel free to disagree with me on this, is
Let's do that. Let me just disagree with you just to create
you just
some.
start with a blanket disagreement. It's
Yeah,
usually how
just to
we start our
create some.
conversations in life.
Yeah, all right, I'm going
I
to
think you're
disagree.
wrong, but hear me out. All of us have different reasons why we said yes to Jesus. Different
Disagree.
seasons of our life, different things, different ways that he absolutely not. There's only one reason we. And so I'm speaking from my thing where I was, in my life when I started attending church regularly. What motivated me at that time is very different than what motivates me today to come to church and do it. And so there is definitely a season and period of time where what may have brought us into the door, and we're just using church as an example. I mean, this goes for Bible studies or reading scripture or worship or anything connected to our faith. But let's use church. The season of time, what brought me into the door, and then now what sustains me, and that has shifted and changed. And it took me trying to understand my motivations of why am I here? What is it here for me? And me kind of self having to challenge and question those things and understand it. But I do believe there is a season that brings us to many different things, and what motivates us, whether it's guilt motivated me to do this thing, but now that I'm here, I see God moving and I see things, and things are shifting in me and my motivations are changing. But only we know our motivations, and the only way we're going to understand our motivations is if we pay attention to them. And I think that's sometimes where the disconnect can happen. For me, is I'm just doing the thing and doing the thing and doing the thing, and I'm not even questioning or asking, why am I doing the thing? Is this because I'm truly trying to know God more, or has this just become a routine in my life? Has this just become something I do? Is this because of external reasons? Does that make sense?
Yeah, you tell me. I think we're talking about two different things. I think we're talking about what I call dating God versus saying I do.
Good
Somebody
distinction.
invited me to church for the first time, and it's a really cute girl. And so I went to church. I didn't care about God or church, but I wanted to be by this cute girl. Okay, I'm not locked on with God. I'm not basing my commitment to God on the cute girl. I'm just around the things of God. Now, if I get to the point where I've surrendered my heart to Christ, and then God responds by giving me His Spirit, that's a surrendered heart. If I come to God and say, Lord, I want to follow you because old cute girl is here, I don't think there's going to be a conversion going on. I don't
Yeah.
think there's going to be a transformed life going on because our motives are wrong.
Yeah.
And so, getting there and being there are two different things. And, God works all kinds of, Paul was on his way to kill Christians when he became one, Saul of
Mm-hmm.
Tarsus, right? So I
I
think
think that's
that's maybe the
no, I
distinction.
think
Yeah.
that's a great distinction for us and those who are listening of what is it as you turn your life over to Christ and you desire to follow Him, then being aware of, okay, what is our motivations? And so to kind of end here, Mark, I'd love to talk a little bit about that conversation of you labeled it the Judas drift, right? We go back to
Mm.
that beginning part of our conversation of like, we're all capable of drifting. We're all capable of our motives getting twisted and shifted for a variety of reasons. And now we find ourselves in dangerous places where we can make poor decisions. And so what are practical ways? What are questions we can ask ourselves? How do we make sure, since only I know my motivations, how do I make sure that I'm not slowly moving into this drift, the Judas drift that we'll call it today?
Hmm. It was back to what I'd mentioned earlier. At least, this isn't in the passage, but the way to break greed is to be generous. The
Hmm.
way to break self focus is to help others.
Mhm.
Now, even that, the motive can be weird because I'm going to help others so people recognize me and think I'm a good person.
Of
So
course.
this is a constant an awareness. And if we're not even aware of it, let me just say probably, no, I don't even want to give a percentage. A majority of the time, our motives are screwed up
Yep.
and they're self-focused. I mean, that's just kind of the way it is. And especially in today's world. Why do I post a picture of me on the internet? What am I trying to communicate about me? What am I trying to facade up about me? Do
Mhm.
I admit I'm wrong? Can I talk about my weaknesses? Can I share with people my struggles? Or do I always have it together? So the way to break some of that is to go the opposite way,
Mm.
or at least identify it. Because if it's super hard for me to be generous with somebody else, then that speaks to usually I'm pretty generous with myself. So um, those are the things that we kind of chatted about briefly on Sunday.
Yeah, I think that's a great. I think that's a great topic, and I think one of the things that you mentioned in there is this idea of, well, being honest about my weaknesses. But where that happens is in community, right? It happens
Mhm.
in when you're doing life with other people. And
Mm.
again, not to
Grow
continue
groups.
plugging Grogu's, but being a part of people. But like, what helps me check my motivations is being honest that, hey, when I go serve, I can get focused on myself and looking good. Great. People know that about me. And now they'll help me when I am serving to make sure, hey, we're making sure your motives are good in this, right? That your motivation is good, that you're not doing things to draw attention to yourself, right? So people know that. So they're helping you keep in check with that. So it's that self-examination, but then being honest with the people around you. And one of the questions that just came through is, how do we recognize false motives without being judgmental? So I'll go there right now. So how do we recognize false motives without being judgmental? I'm guessing that's towards others. So my gut
Oh,
is
you
that
can't.
asking,
Yeah, I was
we can't
just going to
recognize
say.
others' motives.
I was just going to say, if they're talking about how to recognize false motives without being judgmental towards myself, you have to be judgmental. It's part of the gig.
Yeah,
How do you recognize somebody else's false motives with being judgmental? It's not your role.
yeah,
You really can never identify somebody else's motives. Only God and Judas knew about Judas until it was over. Then
yeah,
everybody starts reflecting back, and we even do that when we find somebody really blew it. We almost create a narrative based on our experience that makes them really wrong. Versus at the time, if it would have never ended that way, we would have never said they're wrong. So we even got to watch our motives on that
yeah,
to
yeah,
protect that we got duped.
yeah.
So
Oh,
it's an interesting process.
one of the things that's always given me peace, and it was advice given to me by a pastor when I was younger, when I would wrestle through some of these types of things, of especially when there's self-examination, right? There's no external things that I can point to be like, that's the issue. It's me checking myself. He would always say, well, you're asking the right questions. You're asking the right questions.
Yeah,
And the fact that we're just thinking about it, if you're in a place now and you're like, gosh, is my motive good there? You're asking the right questions. You're already in
right.
a good place where you're open to processing and thinking about it,
Yeah.
and hopefully not dwelling on it to the point of paralysis, but just that you are aware and you're open to examining and open to being open to God, of listening and paying attention, and
And
to
I would just
others.
put a caveat on that wisdom there. Ask the right questions and answer them.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Get the answer. Drill down to the answer. Pray for the answer.
Yeah.
God, is there any way that I'm not doing this for you? I'm doing it for myself. Am I fooling myself?
Yeah.
That's anyway. Good stuff
I love
though,
it.
but we're kind of out of time.
Yeah. We're out of time. Great conversation. We'll be back next week. We'll let you know when. We think 10 a.m. We'll see. We'll see what that looks like. Again, Grow Group, John. I'm leading my first one next week, next Wednesday, 5 p.m. We're starting. Email me if you want to jump in. Amin at pccsc.org, or buzz me through our Facebook group, our PCC online Facebook group, and then we're starting our marriage group as well, August 1st, a Tuesday night. And we want to do in the evening, so we really want both husband and wife to be able to participate in that together. That's important to us. So that's our hope for that. So we'll do that in the evening.
7 week series. 7 week series.
Week series on
Everybody
the.
can carve out 7 weeks for their marriage.
Yep, there it is. Motivation. All
Woo!
right, friends. Have a great Tuesday. Have a great rest of your day. We will see and talk to you soon.